Hi guys, so today we're going to be learning about the different air masses. What is an air mass? How is it formed? What different traits do they have? And then also we'll end this with some of the different types of clouds. So kind of a mix of things today. So an air mass is defined in your book as a huge body of air in the lower atmosphere that has similar temperature and moisture throughout it. So an air mass is going to form over a particular area around the world, and it will basically mimic the traits of wherever it formed. So we'll talk about how temperature and moisture level will change and where you might find where they form. So first we're going to talk about what we call the different temperatures of an air mass, because they all have different names. So temperature, of course, is going to either be warm or cold. The warm air masses we call tropical. These are the ones that are going to form near the equator. And the cold air masses we call polar. And these form near the poles. Pretty simple. For moisture level, the air mass will either be considered wet or dry. The wet moisture levels we call maritime, and these form over water. And it would need to be a large body of water, so an ocean. And the dry air masses we call continental, and they form over land. And since an air mass is defined as having a specific temperature and a moisture combined, you're going to get a mixture of these two temperature and moistures together to give you one particular air mass. So that's what we're going to do next. So there's 4 different types. The first one we call maritime tropical. So if you took good notes, hopefully, you know that means it's going to be a wet and warm air mass. This here is important. The little m, capital T, that's the symbol that we use for that air mass on a weather map. So make sure you write that down. Little m, big T. Some examples of where maritime tropical air masses would form or where they would affect mainly would be like Florida, if you're looking at one side of the country, and on the other side also would be like Southern California. Then there's maritime polar. This is going to be wet and cold. So little m, big P. And these are going to form in, again, 2 different locations depending on the east or the west coast, up in Washington State region, or on the other side around like Maine would be just your examples. Next up we have continental tropical. So this is going to be dry and warm. So it would be little c, big T. Example of where you might find this air mass forming over would be Arizona or New Mexico. And then the last one is continental polar, which is dry and cold. You have little c, big P. And that would be, for example, forming over the Dakotas, like North Dakota or like Montana region, up in Canada would be a good one. So those are your 4 different types of air masses. Notice that none of those states were the Midwest states. So what about us? Well, regions that are located where the air masses are formed will typically have that will not have, that's a typo, will not have any drastic climate changes throughout the year. So they, for example, like California or Florida, they tend to kind of have the same climate throughout the whole year because that's where their air mass is forming. But the Midwest is different. We don't have any air masses that form over us. Instead, this is where all of the air masses collide and come together. Everything is traveling towards the Midwest. So we get this like battleground between the air masses, and where they collide, sometimes that can create issues and frontal systems where you would see like thunderstorms and more severe weather like tornadoes. And it's just because those air masses are so different and they're colliding and meeting up all in the Midwest. Okay, so on this map, I just wanted to kind of show you where they're forming. Notice the maritime polar is up over on the northern ends of each coastline as they start near the water and then they move inward. Continental polar, which is your, again, dry and cold area, air mass is going to be flowing kind of southward as it is collecting in like the Canada region and then flowing towards us. Then you have your maritime tropical. Again, you have two different locations depending on which coastline. And then the continental tropical, which is more of the drier air, is going to be coming in as well. So notice everything, all those arrows are kind of pointing towards the Midwest. That's key. And that's why we get our wonderful 4 different seasons throughout the year. And it's very, very big drastic changes throughout the year. Okay, what I want you to do next, we're going to be talking about clouds. You need to draw a chart in your notebook. So draw a table. It needs to have 4 columns and 4 rows. So just draw it in your notebook all the way to the edge of your paper here. I would space your rows out. It says each row should have 5 to 7 lines, depending on how big you write. So do that. And then we'll go on to our first clouds. So notice I went ahead and labeled the 4 different clouds that we're going to be talking about. So starting us off with the cirrus cloud. Move me. Okay, so in your first column, you'll write cirrus. Sorry, in your first row. On the next space over, you need to write down that the cirrus clouds are located really high up in altitude, so they're the highest ones. And the traits is what you'll be writing in the third column of your row here. So just kind of in bullet points, write down that cirrus clouds are thin, feathery, and white. They're so high up that they're only made of ice crystals. And usually they indicate windy weather, but it's going to be clear out, so no storms or precipitation, just wind. And in your last column, your last box there, I want you to draw your own. So just try to make them kind of feathery, wispy lines. They're not going to be puffy. In fact, cirrus clouds were nicknamed long ago mare's tail clouds because they look like horsetails, kind of strewn apart in the sky. So try your best. The next cloud that we're going to talk about is the cumulus cloud. Cumulus clouds, they are the mid-altitude cloud, mid-level. Their trait, they're puffy, they're white. They oftentimes have this flat bottom feature. So flat bottom and then it puffs up on top. They indicate fair weather, so good weather. And because they're mid-latitude, mid-altitude, we tend to get them made up of ice crystals and water droplets, so kind of a mixture between the two. Again, try your best to draw your picture. These are the ones that look like cotton balls up in the sky that you might, when you were a kid, have figured out like what shape they look like, stuff like that. So just make a puffy cloud. The third cloud we're going to talk about is the stratus cloud. Stratus clouds are the lowest in altitude. They form in layers, and they tend to cover over a very large area. So oftentimes you can't really tell where it begins and where it ends because it's just almost like a blanket over the sky, oftentimes blocking out the sun. So those kind of gray, dreary, kind of hazy days, that most likely means we have a stratus cloud system overhead. You'll also need to know that a stratus cloud, if it is raining, we call it a nimbostratus. Nimbostratus. Nimbo is a prefix that always means rain or precipitation. So nimbostratus. And this is going to be the rain where it just, again, kind of rains all day long. Not a storm, nothing violent happening, but it's just kind of dreary, drizzly weather. And then something also to note is that the really low stratus clouds are actually fog. So those are the ones that kind of blanket the ground. So on your picture for this one, you could just kind of shade in some like hazy clouds that just kind of blanket over. And then the last cloud, I saved the best for last, is the cumulonimbus cloud. Okay, so cumulonimbus cloud, its kind of unique trait is that it goes through all altitudes, low, mid, and high. We have not talked about thunderstorms yet. We are going to tomorrow. So just write down, you'll understand this tomorrow, that what happens is that the warm air is trying to rise up and get above all of the cold air. And that makes the cloud grow vertically. It's the only cloud that grows vertically, which is why it spans over high, mid, and low altitude ranges. So this obviously indicates bad weather. It's a thunderstorm cloud. And its feature shape is that it's shaped like an anvil. Okay, so it has the wide bases, skinny middle, and then it widens out on the top. And we'll talk tomorrow about where that anvil shape comes from. So you can kind of see it over here in your picture. I tried to find a good picture for the anvil shape, but you can see how it almost looks like an hourglass shape. So try to draw your best cumulonimbus cloud. Notice it has nimbus in the name, so you know that that indicates precipitation. After you've written that down, your chart should be complete. And now we have learned all about the different air masses and types of clouds. Thanks, guys.